The night shift at Naval Air Station Oceana was supposed to be quiet. Maria Reyes pushed her cleaning cart down the dim corridor of Hangar 7, the wheels squeaking against polished concrete that smelled of jet fuel and floor wax. Outside, the Virginia coastline breathed cold Atlantic air through gaps in the massive bay doors. She'd been a janitor here for 3 years, invisible to the officers who strode past in flight suits, their conversations about sortie rates and weapons systems floating over her head like a language from another world. Her daughter Sophia waited at home, probably asleep by now, clutching the stuffed rabbit Maria had bought at the thrift store. Single mother, minimum wage, invisible. That's what the base saw when they looked at her, if they looked at all. The explosion came at 2:47 hours, a sound like the sky tearing open. Maria dropped her mop, instinct flooding through neural pathways that hadn't fired in 7 years. The hangar lights flickered. Through the windows, she saw orange flame blooming against the darkness where the flight line met the ocean. Her hands moved before conscious thought, reaching for the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. She was running before she remembered she wasn't supposed to care, wasn't supposed to remember what she'd been before the honorable discharge, before Sophia, before everything fell apart. The FA-18 Super Hornet had gone down just past the seawall, nose first into the shallow waters of the training basin. The cockpit was submerged, canopy cracked but not shattered, and inside, barely visible through the spiderwebbed glass and rising water, a figure slumped against the harness. Maria's boots hit the concrete runway at a dead sprint. Behind her, somewhere distant, alarm klaxons began their wail. Security would arrive in minutes. Fire crews in 5. That pilot had maybe 2. She didn't hesitate at the water's edge. The Atlantic in March was cold enough to stop a heart, but Maria had survived worse. The current pulled at her uniform as she waded deeper, then dove. Her fingers found the canopy release, muscle memory from a lifetime ago guiding her through the emergency procedure. The mechanism was jammed. She surfaced, gasped air, went under again. Second attempt. Third. The metal groaned. On the 4th try, the canopy gave way with a rush of bubbles, and the pilot floated free, unconscious, face pale in the darkness. Maria got an arm around the officer's chest and kicked toward shore, dragging dead weight through water that wanted to pull them both under. The emergency lights found them as she hauled the pilot onto the concrete. Commander Jennifer Ghost Castellanos, according to the name tape. Maria tilted her head back, checked for breathing, started compressions. 30 pumps, 2 breaths. The commander's lips were blue, skin like ice. 30 more, 2 breaths. Sirens grew louder. Maria kept counting, kept pushing, kept breathing life back into a woman who probably didn't know her name and never would. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd cycle, Ghost's eyes opened. She coughed up seawater, gasped, focused on Maria's face with a look of complete confusion. Then the fire trucks arrived in a storm of red light and shouting voices, and Maria stepped back into the shadows where people like her belonged. They wrapped Ghost in thermal blankets and loaded her onto a stretcher. Maria watched from beside the hangar, shivering in her soaked uniform, already thinking about the bus schedule and whether Sophia had woken up scared. A young lieutenant approached, asked for her statement, took notes without really listening. Just another witness. Just another janitor who happened to be in the right place. He didn't ask about her training, didn't wonder how a maintenance worker knew emergency water extraction protocols for military aircraft. Why would he? Maria told him the basic facts, gave her employee number, and walked back to retrieve her cleaning cart from Hangar 7. Her shift ended at 6. She still had 4 hours of floors to finish. But Commander Castellanos remembered the face. Even through the haze of hypothermia and oxygen deprivation, even with her short-term memory scrambled by impact trauma, Ghost remembered the woman who'd pulled her from the cockpit. More importantly, she remembered the way those hands had moved. Efficient. Trained. Certain. Not the fumbling panic of a civilian, but the practiced precision of someone who'd done this before, someone who understood exactly what drowning in a fighter jet meant. Ghost asked questions from her hospital bed. The duty officer brought her the incident report. Maria Reyes, custodial staff, 3 years employed, no military service listed in the base personnel database. But Ghost had flown combat missions over Syria and knew what an operator looked like, even when they were wearing a janitor's uniform. She made a phone call to an old friend at Personnel Command, then another to Naval Special Warfare, then a third to someone who didn't officially exist but could pull records that were supposed to stay buried. What came back made Ghost sit up in bed despite the doctor's orders. Maria Reyes, former call sign, Revenant, former MH-60S Seahawk pilot, 73 combat missions, 2 air medals, 1 Distinguished Flying Cross for extracting a SEAL team under fire in Helmand Province. Honorable discharge following an incident that was still classified above Ghost's pay grade. 7 years of silence, 7 years pushing a mop. Ghost didn't believe in coincidence. She also didn't believe in wasting talent. When she was cleared for light duty 3 days later, she made another call. This one went directly to the station commander, Captain Michael Accoy. They'd served together on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, back when Ghost was still trying to prove women belonged in fighter cockpits, and Accoy was a department head learning how to command. He owed her a favor from a night in the Persian Gulf that neither of them discussed in official channels. She was calling it in now. "I need access to a personnel file," Ghost said, "and then I need you to authorize something unusual." Accoy listened. Halfway through Ghost's explanation, he started laughing. By the end, he was silent, thinking. "You're serious," he finally said. "Dead serious." There was a long pause. "You know this could blow up in both our faces." Ghost touched the bruise on her sternum where Maria's compressions had cracked her ribs, saving her life. "She pulled me out of a sinking aircraft in pitch darkness and rough water, then performed flawless CPR until I stabilized. She did it without hesitation and disappeared before anyone could thank her. That's not a janitor, Captain. That's a pilot who forgot she still knows how to fly." Another pause. Then, "I'll make the call, but Ghost, if this goes sideways, it won't. You don't know that." "Yes," Ghost said quietly, "I do." The next morning, Maria was making breakfast for Sophia, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, when she heard the vehicles. At first, she thought it was a mistake, some convoy that had taken a wrong turn off the main road. Their apartment complex in Norfolk was civilian territory, miles from the base, populated by other single parents and retirees surviving on fixed incomes. Military Humvees didn't come here. Except 5 of them were pulling into the parking lot, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Sophia pressed her face against the window, eyes wide. "Mama, look, Army trucks." "Navy," Maria corrected automatically, her stomach dropping. "Those are Navy." She was still in her bathrobe, hadn't even had coffee yet, and now there were Marines stepping out of the vehicles in dress blues. Actual Marines, in formation, in her parking lot. The neighbors were coming out onto their balconies, phones already recording. This was either a disaster or something else entirely, and Maria couldn't figure out which. The knock came 30 seconds later, firm, professional, the kind of knock that expected to be answered. Maria opened the door to find a master sergeant with a chest full of ribbons and a face that gave away nothing. Behind him, the other Marine stood at attention. "Ma'am, I'm Master Sergeant Rodriguez. We're here on behalf of Commander Jennifer Castellanos and Captain Michael Accoy, commanding officer of Naval Air Station Oceana." Maria's throat went dry. "I don't understand." "Ma'am, we'd like you to come with us." "Am I in trouble?" The master sergeant's expression softened fractionally. "No, ma'am, quite the opposite." Sophia clutched Maria's leg, confused and frightened by the strange men in uniform. Maria looked down at her daughter, then back at Rodriguez, her mind racing through possibilities. Had someone discovered her past? Was this about the classified incident that ended her career? Or was this about 3 nights ago, about pulling a commander from the water? "I need to take my daughter to school," Maria said. "Already arranged, ma'am. One of my Marines is qualified for child transport services. She'll take your daughter safely to school and pick her up this afternoon, with your permission." This was insane. This was impossible. Maria hadn't been called ma'am by anyone in uniform since her discharge. "What is this about?" Rodriguez glanced at the growing crowd of neighbors, their phones still recording. Ma'am, we'd prefer to discuss that at the base, but Commander Castellanos wanted me to tell you something specific. He paused, and for the first time, something like respect crossed his features. She said to tell you, revenants don't stay dead. The old call sign hit Maria like a physical blow. Nobody had called her that in 7 years. Nobody was supposed to know. She looked at Rodriguez, at the Marines, at the 5 Humvees idling in the parking lot like something from a fevered dream. Sophia tugged at her robe. Mama, what's happening? Good question. Maria took a breath, kissed her daughter's forehead, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Get dressed, baby. Mama has to go somewhere. 20 minutes later, she was in the lead Humvee, still trying to process reality. They drove through morning traffic with an escort that made other cars pull aside, treating her like someone important instead of someone invisible. Rodriguez sat across from her, saying nothing, just watching with those unreadable eyes. They arrived at Oceana's main gate at 8:47 hours. The guards waved them through without inspection. They drove past the hangars where Maria had pushed her cleaning cart just hours ago, past the flight line where jets sat ready for morning sorties, past administrative buildings full of officers who'd never looked at her twice. They stopped in front of the base headquarters, and Maria's confusion deepened. This wasn't where you took custodial staff. This was where you brought people who mattered. Rodriguez opened her door. This way, ma'am. Inside, the corridors gleamed with polished tradition. Portraits of naval aviators lined the walls, their faces stern with history and valor. Maria walked between the Marines, feeling like an imposter in her cheap jeans and discount store jacket. They stopped outside a conference room. Rodriguez knocked once, then opened the door and stepped aside. Ma'am. Maria walked in and stopped. The room was full. Captain Alcoy stood at the head of a long table, his uniform crisp, his expression serious. Beside him was Commander Castellanos' ghost, looking pale but determined, her left arm in a sling. And around the table sat at least a dozen other officers, all wearing wings, all watching Maria with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Alcoy gestured to a chair. Ms. Reyes, please sit down. Maria sat, feeling like she'd walked into an ambush. Sir, I don't understand what's happening. Ghost leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. 3 nights ago, you saved my life. You performed a water extraction under conditions that would challenge trained rescue swimmers. You executed emergency medical procedures with textbook precision, and then you vanished before anyone could properly thank you. I was just doing what anyone would. Bullshit. The word came from Ghost with quiet force. Anyone else would have called for help and waited. You acted like someone with training. Like someone who's been there before. The room was silent. Maria felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her, dissecting, evaluating. This was the moment where her past came back to haunt her, where everything she'd buried rose back to the surface. She could lie, she could deflect, or she could tell the truth for the first time in 7 years. She chose truth. I was a pilot, Maria said quietly. Before. MH-60 Seahawks, mostly combat search and rescue, some special operations support. I flew out of Kandahar and Bagram, later from the USS Bataan. I had 73 combat missions before they discharged me. The skepticism in the room shifted to surprise. One of the officers, a woman with commander's insignia, leaned forward. 73 missions is impressive. Why didn't you re-enlist? Maria's hands tightened on the armrests. It wasn't my choice. Alcoy stepped in, his voice careful. Ms. Reyes, we've reviewed your service record, the classified portions. We know what happened in Helmand Province. The memories came back sharp and unwanted. A Taliban ambush. A SEAL team pinned down in a compound that was collapsing under RPG fire. The Seahawk taking hits on approach, hydraulics failing, her co-pilot screaming in her ear to abort. And Maria, call sign Revenant, pushing the damaged bird down into a landing zone barely wide enough for the rotors, holding it steady while the SEALs scrambled aboard, feeling the aircraft shake itself apart beneath her hands. They'd made it out. Barely. All 8 SEALs survived. Maria's co-pilot survived. But the inquiry afterward focused on the risks she'd taken, the orders she'd disobeyed when she went in against explicit command to withdraw. They gave her a medal and a discharge in the same ceremony, told her she was too reckless, too willing to risk the aircraft and her crew, too dangerous to keep flying. I broke protocol, Maria said. I disregarded direct orders. The board determined I was, she paused, remembering the exact words from the discharge review, temperamentally unsuited for continued military aviation operations. Ghost snorted. Temperamentally unsuited. They grounded you for being too brave. The room stirred. Officers exchanged glances. One of them, a lieutenant commander with salt and pepper hair, spoke up. "Ma'am, I was on the battalion. I heard about what you did. Every pilot in that air wing heard about it. You saved 8 lives. And violated every safety protocol doing it," Maria countered. "That's what the board said. That's why I'm here pushing a mop instead of flying." Akoy cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the head of the table. "Ms. Reyes, the reason we brought you here today is not to relitigate your discharge. The reason is that Commander Castellanos believes, and after reviewing your record I'm inclined to agree, that your skills are being wasted in custodial services. We'd like to offer you something." Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sir, I don't have any credentials anymore. My flight certifications lapsed years ago. I'm not even current on basic aircraft operations." "We can fix that," Ghost said. "If you're willing." "Willing to what?" "Train," Akoy said. "Recertify, get back in the cockpit." The words hung in the air like a dream Maria didn't dare touch. "Why?" "Because we need pilots who understand what it means to put lives above procedures," Ghost said. "Because 3 nights ago you proved you still have the instincts, the courage, and the skill. Because talent like yours doesn't just disappear." Maria looked around the table at faces that had gone from skeptical to interested, seeing her not as a janitor but as what she used to be. Used to be, past tense. Could she really go back? "I have a daughter," Maria said. "Sophia, she's 7, I'm all she has. I can't take risks anymore, I can't." "We're not asking you to fly combat missions," Akoy interrupted. "We're offering you a position as a training instructor, teaching water survival and emergency extraction protocols. Shore duty. Regular hours, and a salary that's considerably better than custodial pay." The room tilted. Maria gripped the chair harder, trying to process what she was hearing. "You want me to teach?" "We want you to share what you know," Ghost said. "We want every pilot on this base to have the skills you used to save my life. We want them to learn from someone who's been there, who understands what it means when everything goes wrong at the worst possible moment." It sounded too good to be true. There had to be a catch, a condition, something that would make it impossible. "I'd need to pass evaluations, recertification courses. That takes months and I can't afford to stop working. I have rent, Sophia's school expenses. Full salary during training," Akoy said. "Starting immediately. We're hiring you as a contractor during the certification process, then transitioning you to a GS-12 civilian instructor position once you're current. Base housing assistance available. Full benefits." Maria's mind reeled. GS-12 was serious money. Government benefits meant healthcare for Sophia, stability, a future that didn't involve choosing between groceries and electricity. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ghost urged. "Say you'll stop hiding behind a mop and remember who you are." The words hit deeper than Ghost probably intended. Who you are, not who you were. Present tense. Maria thought about Sophia, about the stuffed rabbit and the thrift store clothes and the nights when she'd counted pennies to make sure her daughter had enough to eat. She thought about the Seahawk, about the feeling of a cyclic stick in her hand and the rotor wash, and the way the world looked from 300 feet in a combat zone. She thought about 7 years of being invisible, and 3 nights ago when her body had remembered everything her mind tried to forget. "I'll need to arrange childcare," Maria said quietly. "During training hours." Ghost smiled. It was the first real emotion Maria had seen from her. "The base has a family support program. We'll help you figure it out." Maria took a breath that felt like the first real air she'd had in years. "Then yes, I'll do it." The room erupted in nods of approval. Akoy extended his hand across the table, and Maria shook it, feeling the firm grip of a commanding officer who just made a decision that was probably going to generate paperwork nightmares for his administrative staff. "Welcome back, Ms. Reyes," he said. "Or should I say, welcome back, Revenant." The call sign settled over her shoulders like an old flight jacket, familiar and heavy with meaning. She'd been dead for 7 years, buried under bills and exhaustion and the weight of being invisible. But revenants don't stay dead. They come back. The meeting dissolved into logistics. Officers approached to introduce themselves, to shake her hand, to tell her they'd heard stories about the Bataan, about the mission in Helmand. Ghost stayed close, answering questions about the training program they'd need to develop, the certification timeline, the equipment requirements. Maria listened, overwhelmed, trying to believe this was real. Rodriguez appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, we have a vehicle ready to take you back to collect your daughter from school, unless you prefer to stay and tour the training facilities." "I need to see Sophia," Maria said immediately. "Of course." But before she left, Ghost pulled her aside, away from the others. Up close, Maria could see the exhaustion in the commander's face, the toll the crash had taken. "Thank you," Ghost said simply. "I haven't properly thanked you for pulling me out." "You don't need to thank me," Maria replied. "Yes, I do. You didn't hesitate. In water that cold, in the dark, with a live aircraft fire burning nearby, you didn't hesitate. That's not training, that's character." Maria looked down, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed to be done." "Exactly," Ghost said. "That's why we need you teaching our people. Not everyone has that instinct, but maybe they can learn it from someone who does." They stood in silence for a moment, two pilots separated by 7 years and one underwater extraction that had changed everything. Then Ghost stepped back, her expression shifting to something more formal. "I'll see you Monday morning, 700 hours, Hangar 3. Wear comfortable clothes. We're going to test your water survival skills to establish a baseline." Maria felt something like excitement flutter in her chest. "Monday, 700. I'll be there." She left through corridors that felt different now, walking past the same portraits of aviators but seeing them with new eyes. She'd been one of them once. Maybe she could be again. The Humvee ride back was quieter. Rodriguez sat across from her, and after a while he said, "My sister's a single mother, 2 kids. I know it's not easy." "It's not," Maria agreed, "but they're worth it." "They are." He paused, then added, "She works 2 jobs to make ends meet." "When I heard what you did, pulling that commander out of the water after a full shift cleaning floors, I thought about her. About how strong you have to be to keep going when everything's stacked against you." Maria didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They picked up Sophia from school at 14:45 hours. Her daughter came running out of the building, her backpack bouncing, her face lighting up when she saw Maria waiting by the military vehicle. "Mama, did you ride in the big truck?" "I did. Was it cool?" Maria looked at the Humvee, at Rodriguez standing at attention, at the life that was opening up in front of them like a door she'd thought was permanently sealed. "Yeah, baby, it was cool." That night after Sophia was asleep, Maria stood in their small kitchen and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from relief so intense it felt like physical pain. 7 years. 7 years of being invisible, of pretending she was okay, of pushing down everything she'd been and everything she'd lost. And now someone had seen her. Someone had remembered. Someone had said, "You still matter." Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Maria dropped Sophia at the base childcare center, a facility she'd walked past 1,000 times while cleaning but never imagined using, and made her way to Hangar 3. Ghost was waiting, along with 3 other instructors, and a Navy rescue swimmer named Petty Officer Jimenez, who had a reputation for being able to extract pilots from situations God himself couldn't salvage. "Revenant," Ghost said by way of greeting. The call sign still felt strange, like wearing someone else's skin. "Commander." "Just Ghost when we're training. This is Jimenez, and these are instructors Malik, H. Wang, and De Silva. They're going to put you through the certification protocols." Jimenez stepped forward, a compact woman with arms that looked like they could bend steel. "Ma'am, we're going to run you through water egress, emergency extraction under various sea states, night operations, and cold water survival. Commander Castellano says you're already trained, but we need to establish current proficiency for the certification board." "Understood." "We'll start easy," Jimenez said with a smile that suggested her definition of easy was wildly different from normal human parameters. "Just a basic cockpit egress from a training simulator. Submerged, low visibility, you'll be inverted and wearing full flight gear. Maria felt old muscle memory stirring. What's the depth? 12 feet. Olympic-sized pool. We'll have safeties in the water, but they won't intervene unless you signal distress. Easy. Right. They suited her up in a flight suit that was 2 sizes too big, helmet, harness, the whole kit. The simulator was a modified aircraft fuselage rigged on a crane over the pool. Maria climbed in, strapped herself down, and waited while they explained the procedures she already knew by heart. They'd invert the simulator, submerge it, and she'd have to escape on her own. Textbook drill. She'd done it 100 times during her original certification. The crane lifted. The world tilted. Water rushed in through the open canopy, shockingly cold despite the heated facility. The simulator flipped, and Maria hung upside down in the harness, submerged, the pool lights filtering through the water in wavering patterns. She counted 3 seconds, let the turbulence settle, then reached for the harness release. Her fingers found the mechanism, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have fumbled. Click. The harness released. She pushed away from the seat, oriented toward the surface, kicked hard. Broke into air, gasped, climbed out of the pool. The instructors were watching, faces neutral but eyes sharp with evaluation. Time, Ghost called out. 9 seconds from submersion to surface. Textbook. Malik raised an eyebrow. Most people take 15 their first time, even experienced pilots. I told you, Ghost said quietly. She's not most people. They ran her through 12 more scenarios. Each one harder, more disorienting, with added complications like simulated fire, equipment malfunctions, injured co-pilots she had to extract first. Maria moved through them like she'd never stopped training, her body remembering what 7 years had tried to erase. By Scenario 8, the instructors had stopped taking notes and started just watching. By Scenario 12, Jimenez was grinning openly. Okay, the rescue swimmer said as Maria hauled herself out of the pool for the last time. I'm convinced. You could probably teach me a few things. Maria stripped off the helmet, water streaming from her hair, breathing hard but feeling more alive than she had in years. How'd I do? Ghost walked over, consulted with the other instructors, then turned back with an expression Maria couldn't quite read. Revenant, in my professional assessment, you just completed in 4 hours what takes most candidates 3 weeks. You didn't just pass the recertification. You set the facility record. The words took a moment to register. I did. You did. Which means we're accelerating your timeline. You're cleared for basic instruction starting next Monday. We'll continue advanced certifications in parallel, but you're qualified to begin teaching immediately. Maria stood there dripping pool water onto the hangar floor, surrounded by instructors who were looking at her with respect instead of dismissal, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. Maybe she really was still a pilot. Maybe Revenant wasn't dead after all. The weeks that followed blurred together in a cascade of recertification courses, lesson planning, and slowly remembering how to exist in a military space as someone who mattered. She studied training protocols, updated her knowledge of current aircraft systems, and worked with Ghost to develop a curriculum that balanced safety regulations with the kind of real-world split-second decision-making that actually kept pilots alive. Sophia adjusted to the base childcare with surprising ease, making friends with other military kids, and proudly telling anyone who'd listen that her mama was a pilot. Not used to be. Was. Present tense. The first time Maria stood in front of a classroom full of student naval aviators, she felt imposter syndrome crawl up her spine like ice. These were hotshot young pilots fresh out of Pensacola, cocky and brilliant and absolutely certain they were invincible. They looked at her, a woman in contractor clothes instead of a flight suit, with barely concealed skepticism. I'm Maria Reyes, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Former call sign Revenant. I flew MH-60 Seahawks in Afghanistan and Iraq. 73 combat missions, most of them in conditions that violated every safety protocol you've learned. I'm here to teach you how to survive when everything goes wrong. One of the students, a kid who couldn't be older than 23 with a call sign patch that read cowboy, raised his hand. Ma'am, no disrespect, but I've been through water survival at Pensacola. What can you teach that we haven't already learned? Fair question. Arrogant delivery, but fair question. Maria walked to the equipment locker and pulled out a helmet. Standard issue, same kind they were all trained on. She held it up. This is a standard HGU-56 flight helmet. In a water emergency, it becomes a death trap if you don't know the exact sequence to remove it under pressure. Pensacola taught you the sequence in calm water, controlled conditions. I'm going to teach you how to do it in the dark, inverted, with your aircraft on fire and your co-pilot unconscious beside you. The classroom went quiet. Cowboy's smirk faded. "That's specific enough for you?" Maria asked. "Yes, ma'am." She spent the next 2 hours demonstrating techniques that weren't in any manual, tricks she'd learned from SEALs and rescue swimmers, and her own mistakes in places where errors meant body bags. The students went from skeptical to attentive to genuinely impressed. By the end of the session, Cowboy approached her desk. "Ma'am, that thing you showed us about using the canopy frame for orientation when you're inverted, I've never seen that in training materials." "That's because I figured it out in Helmand Province when my bird went down in a river," Maria said. "The official manual assumes you'll have visibility in calm water. Combat assumes you'll have neither." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am. That could save my life someday." After he left, Ghost appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arm finally out of the sling. "You're a natural teacher. I'm terrified I'm going to get something wrong and one of these kids will die because of it." "That fear is what makes you good at this," Ghost said. "The instructors who think they know everything are the dangerous ones. You know how much you don't know, so you teach them to think, not just to follow procedures." She walked into the classroom, picked up the helmet Maria had been using for demonstration. "How are you settling in?" "Still feels surreal," Maria admitted. "Like I'm going to wake up and it'll all be gone." "It's not going anywhere. You've earned this." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who'd been shaped by violence and emerged as something harder than the military had expected. Then Ghost said, "I want to show you something. Come with me." They walked across the base to a section Maria had never been cleared to enter during her janitorial days. The squadron-ready room where pilots gathered before missions, where the walls were covered in photographs and plaques commemorating operations most civilians would never hear about. Ghost led her to a specific wall, pointed to a photograph. It showed a Seahawk in mid-flight, rotors throwing spray, mountains in the background. Below it, a brass plaque read, "Operation Anaconda Rescue, Helmand Province." MH-60 Seahawk pilot LT, Maria Reyes, call sign Revenant, extracted 8 SEAL team personnel under direct enemy fire after helicopter sustained critical damage. Despite orders to withdraw, LT, Reyes maintained position until all personnel were recovered. All survived. LT Reyes awarded Distinguished Flying Cross and recommended for promotion. Maria stared at the plaque she'd never known existed. "They mounted this after you left," Ghost said quietly. The SEAL team commander pushed for it. He wanted people to remember what you did, even if the board decided to discharge you. "I violated orders. You saved lives. Sometimes those things are the same action viewed from different perspectives." Maria touched the plaque, feeling the engraved letters. 8 men who went home to their families because she'd ignored the voice on the radio telling her to abort. 8 men who were probably scattered across the world now, living lives they wouldn't have had if she'd followed protocol. "Do they ever come back?" she asked. "The SEALs. One of them is stationed at Dam Neck now," Ghost said. "Special Warfare Development Group. His name is Senior Chief Ramos. He stops by the ready room sometimes, looks at this plaque. I told him you were back on base. He'd like to meet you." Before Maria could respond, the ready room door opened and 3 pilots walked in, deep in conversation about a training sortie. They stopped when they saw Ghost, snapped to attention. Then they saw Maria and something shifted in their expressions. Recognition. "You're Revenant," one of them said. A woman, Lieutenant JG, her wings still shiny with newness. "Ma'am, I sat in your class yesterday. That water egress technique you showed us, we tried it in the simulator this morning. Cut our extraction time by 6 seconds. Maria felt something warm spread through her chest. 6 seconds could mean the difference between life and drowning. "Good, keep practicing until it's muscle memory." "Yes, ma'am." The The pilots left, and Maria turned back to the plaque, to the proof that what she'd done 7 years ago still mattered, still echoed forward through time. "Thank you for showing me this." "You needed to see it," Ghost said. "You needed to remember that even when the system fails you, the work you did doesn't disappear." They walked back toward the training facilities, and Maria realized something fundamental had changed. She wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't invisible. She was Revenant again, not because of the call sign, but because she'd come back from a death that had been professional and emotional and very nearly permanent. 3 months passed. Maria's classes became the most requested training sessions on the base. Her reputation spread through the squadron networks, carried by students who'd gone on to their fleet assignments and told their new squadrons about the instructor who'd actually been there, who knew what combat felt like. Sophia thrived in the base school system, made friends, stopped asking when they'd have to move again. Maria signed a lease on a small house in base housing, the first time in 7 years she'd had a place that felt like home. She was packing up their apartment one weekend when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello, Maria Reyes." The voice was male, rough with the particular texture of someone who'd spent years shouting over helicopter rotors. "Speaking. This is Senior Chief Marcus Ramos. Commander Castellano said you were back at Oceana. I wanted to call personally." The name clicked. "SEAL Team, Helmand Province. Senior Chief, I remember you. You saved my life, ma'am. You saved my team's life. We've been waiting 7 years to say thank you properly." Maria sat down on a moving box, suddenly unsteady. "You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. You went against direct orders. You risked your career and your life. That's not just doing your job. That's heroism." The word felt too big, too heavy. Maria didn't know what to do with it. "How's your team?" she asked, deflecting. "Scattered now. Johnson retired, runs a security company in Texas. Williams is at DEVGRU with me. Martinez got out, became a high school teacher. Miller," his voice caught slightly, "Miller didn't make it home from Syria 3 years ago. But he had 3 extra years because you pulled him out of Helmand. 3 years with his wife and kids. That matters." Maria closed her eyes, grief and pride mixing into something complicated. "I'm sorry about Miller." "Me too. But I wanted you to know, all of us, we heard what happened after Helmand, how they discharged you. We thought it was bullshit then, and we think it's bullshit now. You deserved better." "I'm back now," Maria said. "Teaching. Ghost told me. She also told me you're the reason she's alive. Seems like pulling pilots out of bad situations is your specialty." "Seems like." "Ma'am, I know this is unusual, but my team is running training exercises at Dam Neck next month. We'd like to invite you to observe, maybe consult on some of our helicopter integration protocols, if you're interested." Maria thought about it. SEALs, the most elite warriors in the naval arsenal, asking for her input. "I'd be honored, Senior Chief." "The honor's ours, ma'am." "Revenant." The call sign again, but this time it didn't feel like putting on someone else's identity. It felt like remembering her own. After they hung up, Maria sat in the half-packed apartment and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was teaching pilots who would carry her lessons into combat zones across the world, consulting with special operations forces, rebuilding a life that had purpose beyond survival. Sophia emerged from her room carrying her stuffed rabbit. "Mama, why are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby. You cry when you're happy. Sometimes." Sophia climbed into her lap, all 7 years of fierce love and uncomplicated trust. "I like our new house." "Me too." "Will we stay there forever?" Forever was a promise Maria had learned not to make, but she could promise something else. "We'll stay as long as we're happy and safe, and right now we're both." That seemed to satisfy Sophia. She returned to her room, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts and the sound of jets taking off in the distance, their engines roaring toward the sky. The next month brought changes Maria hadn't anticipated. Captain Akoy called her into his office one afternoon, his expression serious. "Revenant, we need to discuss something. Your contractor position was always meant to be temporary, a bridge to get you certified and into a permanent civilian instructor role. We're accelerating that timeline." Maria's stomach dropped. "Am I being let go?" "Exactly the opposite. We want to offer you a GS-13 position, higher than initially planned with an expanded role. You'd be heading up a new water survival and emergency extraction program for the entire Atlantic Fleet. It would mean occasional travel to other bases for training, but significantly increased pay and responsibility. You'd be developing curriculum that could save dozens, maybe hundreds of lives over the next decade. The scope of it took her breath away. Sir, I'm still relearning half of this. I'm not qualified to. The fleet thinks you are. I think you are. More importantly, every pilot you've trained thinks you are. Maria, you have a gift for teaching people not just how to survive, but how to think clearly when everything's falling apart. That's not something you can train into people. That's something you have to have lived through yourself. I need to think about it, Maria said. It would mean more time away from Sophia. Take a week. Discuss it with your daughter. But Maria, opportunities like this don't come along often, especially not for people who were told they weren't good enough. She took the offer home, literally, carrying the formal proposal documents like they might explode. That night after Sophia was asleep, she spread them across the kitchen table and tried to calculate whether she could do this, whether she should. The money was life-changing. The responsibility was terrifying. The next morning, Ghost stopped by her classroom before lessons started. Heard Akoi made you an offer. News travels fast. It's a squadron. There are no secrets. Ghost leaned against Maria's desk, her expression thoughtful. What are you going to do? I don't know. It's a lot of responsibility. What if I fail? What if you succeed? Ghost countered. What if pilots 5 years from now are alive because you taught them something that saved their lives? What if the program you develop becomes the standard across the entire Navy? What if your daughter grows up watching her mother do something important and difficult and meaningful, and learns that's possible for her too? Maria hadn't thought about it that way. You're very persuasive. I'm very right. Take the job, Maria. Stop apologizing for being exceptional. The week passed. Maria talked to Sophia, explaining that Mama might have to travel sometimes for work, that there would be nights when a babysitter would handle bedtime. Sophia, with the adaptability of 7-year-olds, asked one question, but you'll always come back. Always. Then it's okay. Simple as that. Maria called Akoi on day 6. I'll take the position. When do I start? His satisfaction was audible through the phone. Officially, 1st of next month. Unofficially, we need you to consult on a training accident investigation that happened at Jacksonville last week. A pilot went down during a night training mission, ejected over water. She survived, but barely. We're trying to understand what worked and what didn't in her emergency procedures. Send me the files, Maria said. I'll review them tonight. The investigation introduced her to a different side of military aviation. The careful, painful process of learning from near disasters to prevent actual ones. Maria read through the accident reports with a professional eye, noting the sequence of failures that had led to the pilot ejecting into the Atlantic at night with minimal survival gear. The pilot, a lieutenant named Park, had survived 12 hours in the water before rescue. Maria requested permission to interview her. They met at the hospital in Jacksonville, Park's face still showing the toll of hypothermia and exposure. Ma'am, they said you wanted to talk about what happened. Only if you're comfortable, Maria said. I'm trying to understand your survival decision-making so we can incorporate it into training protocols. Park nodded slowly. I did everything by the book. Ejected clean, activated beacon, inflated vest. But the water was rough and it was pitch black and I couldn't see anything. The survival training we'd done was in daylight, calm seas. Nothing prepared me for how disorienting it is when you can't see the difference between up and down, when every wave feels like it's trying to drown you. What kept you going? Anger mostly, Park said with a weak smile. I kept thinking about how many people told me I wasn't tough enough for combat aviation because I'm 5'2". I decided I wasn't going to die and prove them right. Maria understood that particular flavor of spite. That's good motivation. Ma'am, can I ask you something? They said you're Revenant, the pilot from the Helmand extraction. That's me. Why'd they discharge you? Everyone I've talked to says what you did was legendary. Maria chose her words carefully. I broke rules to save lives. The board decided that made me dangerous. They weren't entirely wrong. I was willing to risk everything, including my crew. But they also weren't entirely right because sometimes rules are guidelines and lives are absolutes. Park absorbed this. Would you do it again if you had the same choice? Every time, Maria said without hesitation. Every single time. 8 men went home to their families. That matters more than my career ever could. The interview continued for another hour. Maria took detailed notes, asked questions that came from her own experience with water survival and the specific terror of nighttime maritime emergencies. When she left, Park called after her. "Ma'am, thank you for believing that what I did mattered enough to study." "It does matter," Maria assured her. "Your survival is going to teach pilots for the next 20 years how to handle the worst night of their lives." Back at Oceana, Maria compiled her findings into a comprehensive report that became the foundation for updated water survival protocols. She recommended changes to equipment, training scenarios, and psychological preparation for extended ocean survival. Akoi read it, passed it up the chain of command, and 3 weeks later Maria was presenting her recommendations to a room full of admirals at the Pentagon. Standing in front of naval leadership, Maria felt the old anxiety trying to surface. These were the people who'd signed off on her discharge 7 years ago, who decided she was too dangerous to keep flying. Now they were listening to her recommendations like she was an expert worth consulting. The presentation went smoothly until Admiral Chen, a stern woman with iron-gray hair, asked a pointed question. "Ms. Reyes, your record shows a pattern of disregarding orders when you disagreed with command decisions. How do we know these training protocols won't encourage that same disregard for authority?" The room went silent. This was the test, the moment where Maria's past would either validate or destroy her present. She met the Admiral's gaze directly. "Ma'am, with respect, I didn't disregard orders because I disagreed with authority. I disregarded orders because 8 men were going to die if I followed them. There's a difference between insubordination and emergency decision-making. What I'm proposing in these protocols is that we train pilots to recognize that difference, to understand when rules are protecting them and when rules are killing them. That's a dangerous philosophy. Dying because you followed procedures is also dangerous, ma'am. The goal is to give pilots the judgment to know which danger is acceptable." Admiral Chen studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago, before they made me an admiral and taught me to appreciate the value of rules." The room relaxed fractionally. "Your recommendations are sound, Ms. Reyes. We'll implement them fleet-wide with appropriate attribution." Dismissed. Maria walked out of the Pentagon feeling like she just survived a combat mission without firing a shot. Ghost, who'd accompanied her to D.C., grinned as they reached the parking lot. "You told an admiral that rules can kill people. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Probably. But she approved your protocols, so it worked." They drove back to Oceana, and Maria watched the Virginia countryside roll past, thinking about how far she'd come from the woman who'd cleaned floors in Hangar 7. That woman had been invisible, discarded, convinced her best days were behind her. This woman was shaping training protocols for the entire Atlantic Fleet. Both were her. Both mattered. 6 months into her new position, Maria received an invitation to speak at the Naval Academy's annual aviation symposium. The request came with a note. "We'd like you to discuss decision-making under pressure and the balance between protocol adherence and mission success. Your unique perspective on this topic would be invaluable for our midshipmen." Unique perspective. That was a polite way of saying controversial past that we can now talk about because you've been rehabilitated. Maria almost declined. Speaking to midshipmen meant confronting her discharge publicly, standing in front of future officers and explaining why she'd been deemed unfit. But Ghost convinced her. "Those kids need to hear your story. They need to understand that you can break, you can be broken, and you can come back. They need to know that failure isn't final." So Maria went to Annapolis. She stood on a stage in front of 300 midshipmen and told them the truth about Helmand Province, about the discharge, about 7 years of pushing a mop while trying to remember who she'd been. She told them about Commander Castellano and the Seahawk that went down off the coast, about how muscle memory had pulled her into the water before conscious thought could stop her. She told them about the choice between safety and lives, and how that choice wasn't always clear until years later when you understood the cost of both options. The midshipmen listened with an intensity that reminded Maria why she'd become a pilot in the first place, because aviation was more than machines and procedures. It was about people making impossible decisions in impossible circumstances and living with the consequences. During the Q&A session, a young woman in the second row raised her hand. "Ma'am, do you regret the choice you made, the one that got you discharged?" Maria considered the question honestly. "I regret that 8 men had to be in that situation. I regret that my co-pilot was injured in the extraction. I regret that my daughter spent 7 years with a mother who was barely surviving instead of thriving. But do I regret going back for those SEALs? No, I'd make the same choice tomorrow and the day after and every day for the rest of my life, because they mattered more than I did in that moment. Even knowing you'd lose your career, even knowing that." The young woman nodded, satisfied. Another hand went up, a male midshipman near the back. "Ma'am, how did you survive 7 years knowing you'd been pushed out?" That was harder to answer. Maria took a breath, choosing words carefully. "I survived because I had a daughter who needed me. I survived because some part of me believed that what I'd done still mattered, even if the institution didn't agree. And I survived because I'm stubborn enough to wake up every morning and decide to keep going, even when I didn't know where I was going to. Some days, that's all you can do. Wake up, keep going, trust that eventually the path becomes clear." The symposium ended with a standing ovation that made Maria uncomfortable and proud in equal measure. Afterward, dozens of midshipmen approached to shake her hand, to tell her their own stories of overcoming obstacles, to ask advice about their futures. One of them, a soft-spoken woman who introduced herself as Midshipman Corps, lingered until the crowd dispersed. "Ma'am, I'm going into aviation, helicopters hopefully, and I'm scared that I'll face the same choice you did between following orders and doing what's right. How do you know which to choose?" Maria looked at this young woman who reminded her so much of herself 2 decades ago, full of determination and uncertainty. "You won't know for sure, not in the moment. But you'll know in your gut, in that place where instinct lives. And when that moment comes, you have to trust yourself enough to act, because hesitation kills people just as surely as wrong decisions. What if I'm wrong? Then you live with it, you learn from it, and you do better next time. But Midshipman Corps, I promise you this. If you're asking these questions now, if you're thinking about the moral weight of command before you ever step into a cockpit, then you're going to be the kind of officer who makes good decisions when it matters." Corps' eyes glistened. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from you." After she left, Ghost appeared at Maria's elbow. "You're good at this, inspiring the next generation. I'm just telling them what I wish someone had told me. That's what makes it effective." They flew back to Oceana, and Maria returned to her classroom, to her students, to the daily work of teaching survival to pilots who would carry those lessons into combat zones she'd never see. The work was important. The work mattered. That was enough. A year after the first morning the Humvees arrived, Captain Akoy called Maria back to his office. She'd learned to read his expressions, and this one was complicated, pride mixed with something that looked like sadness. "Revenant, I need to tell you something. Admiral Chen has requested you for a position at the Pentagon, training development and oversight for all naval aviation survival programs. It's a significant promotion, GS-14 level, and it would put you at the center of policy development for the entire Navy." Maria sat down heavily. "Sir, I just established the Atlantic Fleet program. Moving to DC would mean leaving your students, I know, but Maria, this is the kind of opportunity that defines careers. You'd have influence over training standards for every naval aviator for the next decade. You'd be shaping policy at the highest levels. And Sophia would have to change schools again, leave her friends, adapt to a new city. That's the cost," Akoy acknowledged. "I won't lie to you, this job will demand sacrifices, but it's also recognition of everything you've accomplished. The Navy is saying, officially and publicly, that you were right 7 years ago, that your judgment is valued, that your experience matters. Maria thought about the plaque in the ready room, about the students who stopped her in the halls to tell her they'd passed their certifications, about Sophia's joy at finally having stability. Can I think about it? You have 2 weeks. But Maria, whatever you decide, I want you to know something. When you walked into that conference room a year ago, I wasn't sure we were making the right call. I thought maybe Ghost was letting gratitude cloud her judgment. But you've proven me wrong in every possible way. You've become one of the most effective instructors we've ever had. The Navy is better because you're in it. Don't forget that, regardless of what you choose. The words settled into Maria's chest, warm and solid. She'd spent 7 years believing she'd failed, that her best contributions were behind her. Now the captain of Naval Air Station Oceana was telling her she'd made a difference. She walked back to her classroom, past the hangars where she used to push a cleaning cart, and thought about trajectories. How a single moment, pulling Ghost from that cockpit, had altered the course of her entire life. How visibility was a gift and a burden.